Ladies and gentlemen, would you please take your seats? We're about to begin the proceedings. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please to take your seats. We're about to begin this morning's proceedings. Distinguished members of the Forum, distinguished delegates, observers and friends, I declare open the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It is a special pleasure for me to extend a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations. In accordance with the customs of the indigenous peoples, and in recognition of the peoples of these lands, we will now have a traditional ceremonial welcome by the Chief of the Onondaga Nation, Chief Todadaho Sid Hill.
So the hon si yostaken jokwa. Ja, sungwawi ne sungwai isa niongwai hot tank. Nait ne hadik don niongwit tages kadahne en niondega. Na go and what the yahta ne gana henyo. You did again guy one dakwa to know and got a gohta ne o hand guy for dikwi. And da na gohya, only went out there, Tony one takes it there, it's scano, I one of doing your head. Da na gohya, need the ongwit tage, ungwa yosine tone, it's scado twine. One they go eat then what the after then to that no done it to eat now take don't go ni go and down the here to how and daddy 19 no hot yet no hankwa to know he and toss it at neo eat go again hasa to know the go hard and no go ni go he you're stuck with and down I it then what how I soon got the what then this no ni sa go we home that. And down I did with what they know, yeah, Scada and Boy Guanigo, but the Tino had ne a quig, but then I don't quite this side. Down it to the now take on Guanigo. And down there, what did you know, hand a quig, what that hind down, and it's on quite this side.
So for the many things Creator has planted on earth, for our benefit that we live a good life, we bring our minds as one in that direction, and we greet and we think what He has put on earth for our enjoyment and our benefit. So now we direct our minds to the soft blowing winds to bring us a good air to breathe and bring us peace of mind. In that direction, we bring our minds as one mind. We greet and thank the winds, so be it our minds. So now there are things in the sky world. He given them special duties, special jobs. First of all, our grandfather, the thunders, and then our eldest brother, the sun, and our grandmother, moon, and our grand ancestors, the stars, is the big reason that Creator given their duties. They're still carrying on their duties, night and day, to take care of us. So that direction we greet and we think these things in the sky world Creator has put there to take care of us. So be it our minds. And then in the sky world are the four beings we call our protectors. Creator give them a duty is to watch over us and help us straighten our minds out when we have problems, we have stress. So Creator picked them out and give them this duty to watch over us and protect us so we have a good mind as we walk about earth. And also He picked out a man amongst us, our leader, who brought a message from Creator. We call him the Handsome Lake. So in that direction, we bring our minds as one mind. We greet and you thank the four beings, the four protectors, and also our leader, a handsome lake. Now the Creator meant it for to be. We start on the earth, and everything in between earth and skyward, we agree and we think. And it's never lacking, never ending. Every day, every night, He's sending down His compassion, His love for us. And we're lucky as an Indian people, He gives for us a way to make rights in our lives as we walk about earth. So in that direction, we bring our minds together as one mind. We agree and we think. Our Creator in the sky world, so be it our minds. And for that much now, these words that I bring out to you, we thank you for listening. Danito.
Of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Distinguished members of the Forum, distinguished delegates, we shall now proceed to the first item on the agenda, the election of the chair for this session. I first give the floor to Mr. Brian Keane.
Thank you. I would like to renominate Ms. Mariam Walet Abubakrin as chair of the Permanent Forum.
I thank Mr. Keane for the nomination of Ms. Mariam Walet Mohamed Abubakrin as chair of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I now give the floor to Mr. Ilifuhara Laltaika.
The appointment.
I thank Mr. Laltaika for his statement. May I take it that it is the wish of the members of the Permanent Forum to re-elect Ms. Mariam Walet Mohamed Abubakrin as the chair of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues by acclamation? It is so decided. I wish to extend my warmest congratulations to Ms. Abubakrin on her election. I am confident that she will guide this session of the Forum to a successful conclusion. I would now like to invite Ms. Abubakrin to take over the proceedings of the meeting.
Mesdames et Messieurs, les membres.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, ladies and gentlemen, representatives, observers and friends, I should like to thank Mr. Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist, for opening the session and for his kind words addressed to me. I would also like to thank the members of the Permanent Forum for re-electing me as chair of the 17th session. I will make every effort to live up to their expectations and to ensure the smooth conduct of this session. As chair of this session, I am particularly happy, on behalf of members of the Forum, to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests at this opening meeting. His Excellency Miroslav Lajczak, President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, and Her Excellency Inga Rhonda King, Vice President of the Economic and Social Council. It is also a great honor for me to welcome His Excellency Evo Morales Ayma, President of the plurinational state of Bolivia, who is joining us this morning. Distinguished members of the Forum, distinguished observers and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to invite His Excellency Miroslav Lajčák, President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, to make a statement. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, Grand Chiefs and Chiefs, distinguished delegates, colleagues, Indigenous friends from around the world, welcome to the United Nations. Welcome to our 17th Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We have a lot of ground to cover and a lot of issues to discuss. And to start us off, I want to make 4 points this morning. The first is on people. The very first words of the United Nations Charter say, "We, the people." So this organization is of and for people. But we have not always seen this in our work. Too often our meetings and events here have represented only certain types of people: diplomats, ministers, dignitaries, UN officials. This, at times, prevented us from getting a reality check from the ground, and it has allowed some of our activities to become too far removed from the experiences of people around the world. But this is changing, and we do not have to look further than this hall today to see that. The United Nations is doing more. It is engaging people outside of this building, including indigenous people. And I'm proud to say that many of these efforts began here, inside this very hall. 11 years ago, the General Assembly put indigenous issues firmly on the international agenda. It adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the World's Indigenous Peoples. Then, it set about turning declarations into actions. In 2014, the Assembly gathered for the first World Conference on Indigenous People. This was a big step, but the discussions confirmed that we had a long way to go, not only in our work to realize the rights of indigenous communities on the ground, but also in building stronger partnerships between indigenous peoples and the United Nations. And last year, the Assembly took another step. After 2 years of discussion, it decided to create a new space for interactive hearings. These hearings should find ways to break down the barriers to the participation of indigenous peoples in the work of the United Nations. I'm honored to be presiding over the first one tomorrow, and I encourage you all to come with concrete ideas and proposals. But today, as we open this forum, let us not forget, the United Nations is here for people, and that includes indigenous people. The steps taken by the General Assembly so far have had good results, but we cannot yet say that this organization has opened its doors wide enough, and so we need to be more ambitious. As my second point, however, I want to issue a warning. We cannot let recent progress hide the facts on the ground. These facts are bleak, but they need to be seen and heard by all of us here. There are 370 million indigenous people in the world today. They make up just 5% of the world's population. But when we take poverty into account, we see a spike in the figures, because indigenous people amount to 15% of the world's poorest people, according to the World Bank. That's shocking. And poverty is not the only challenge they face. Their human rights are being violated. They do not always have access to decent housing and schools. They are being excluded and marginalized from the systems that should protect them. They are facing violence and even death just for asserting their basic rights, and they are losing the lands and resources they depend on for survival. Which brings me to my third point on the theme of this year's forum. We are here to focus on indigenous land, territories, and resources. And so we should, because they are being taken away. Indigenous people are being dispossessed. They are losing the lands their ancestors called home. But even when they can hold onto their own territories, it is still not plain sailing. Their land and its resources are being degraded around them. Sometimes this is because of human activity. Other times it's caused by the climate change. In March, I convened a high-level event on water. During it, we heard from Autumn Peltier, a 13-year-old water activist from the Wik-Wimikong First Nations. She spoke about the crucial role the water plays in her community. And she told us about her fears that this water will dry up or become too polluted to drink. So she made a call to action, and I want to echo it today. She said, "We cannot just pray anymore. We must do something, and we need to do it now. We can no longer talk about indigenous lands as if they are like any others. We need to better understand their significance for the communities they belong to. They represent livelihoods, spirituality, family, and indeed, survival. So I'm glad we are focusing on this issue for the 17th Forum. As my final point, I want to look ahead. The signs do look positive. The United Nations has been doing more to open its doors to indigenous people, and it does not end there. On the ground, the United Nations teams are developing stronger partnerships. I saw this myself when I traveled to Colombia last month. In the western town of Totoro, I visited indigenous communities. I saw how closely they are working with various United Nations agencies, and I saw how determined they are to make their communities stronger and to ensure that the peace agreement sticks. Other encouraging signs are being seen at national level. In recent years, many states have deepened their engagement with indigenous peoples. New laws and policies have been adopted, and these are helping to protect and promote the rights of indigenous peoples. Some countries are even recognizing indigenous institutions. This means that the bodies and people chosen to represent indigenous communities can better interact with national policymakers. I'm sure we will hear many of the best practices during the forum. So we should be hopeful, but we cannot ignore the very real and very serious challenges. They cast a shadow over the future of many indigenous communities, and they demand our urgent attention. Excellencies, dear friends, our resolutions and our speeches can make it seem like everything is perfect. They emphasize the rights of indigenous peoples. They recognize the value of indigenous culture and heritage, and they encourage greater interaction and integration and participation of indigenous peoples in the decisions that affect them. But everything is not perfect. The reality for indigenous peoples is very different to how it sounds on paper. None of our resolutions talk about their desperations. None of our speeches can give credit to their pain. They deserve more than just our words. Words cannot protect their ancestral lands. Words cannot keep their lakes clean. And words cannot make sure there is a future ahead for their children. And so I hope we can have a permanent forum which goes beyond words, and a permanent forum which focuses not on politics or positions, but on people. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for his statement. I now invite Her Excellency Inga Rhonda King, Vice President of the Economic and Social Council, to make a statement. You have the floor, Madam.
Your Excellency, Mr. Evo Morales, President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, distinguished members of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, distinguished representatives of member states, indigenous peoples organizations, and non-governmental organizations, distinguished representatives of the United Nations system and intergovernmental organizations, distinguished elders, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure to address the opening of the 17th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We are meeting at year 3 of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The overall focus of the 2030 Agenda on leaving no one behind and reducing inequalities makes it particularly important for indigenous peoples, who are almost universally in situations of disadvantage compared with other segments of the population. Many of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and targets are relevant to indigenous peoples and have direct linkages to the commitments in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This year's theme for the forum, Indigenous Peoples' Collective Right to Lands, Territories, and Resources, reminds us that around the world, indigenous peoples are fighting for recognition of their right to own, manage, and develop their traditional lands, territories, and resources. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the result of more than 2 decades of negotiations, emphasizes that indigenous peoples' control over their lands, territories, and resources will enable them to maintain and strengthen their institutions, cultures, and traditions, and to promote their development in accordance with their aspirations and needs. Later this year, in July, we will keep the situation of indigenous peoples in mind when we meet at the high-level political forum on sustainable development to review progress. The theme will be transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. There will also be a focus on sustainable development goals related to water and sanitation, energy, human settlements, consumption and production, and the protection and sustainable use of ecosystems, all of which are critical to indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have much to contribute through their deep understanding of and connection with the land. If we look at indigenous lands and territories, they are there because you have been managing your environment sustainably for generations. I would like to encourage you to continue engaging in the 2030 Agenda. I also call on member states to work with indigenous peoples and learn from their extremely valuable contributions. As an advisory body to the Economic and Social Council, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues has an essential role in providing expert advice and recommendations as we consider the progress made and where increased efforts are needed with regards to indigenous peoples. I commend the efforts of the Permanent Forum to raise awareness on indigenous peoples in the work of other ECOSOC bodies. For example, the 62nd session of the Commission on the Status of Women in March this year reflected in its agreed conclusions the need to implement economic and social policies that promote and protect the rights of indigenous women and girls living in rural and remote areas by addressing the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and barriers they face. I would like to encourage the forum to continue to engage with other ECOSOC bodies to address the diverse challenges that Indigenous peoples face in multiple spheres, and to promote a more coherent and coordinated approach by the United Nations system. Ladies and gentlemen, if Indigenous land rights are not respected, the future of Indigenous peoples is jeopardized. You have 2 weeks ahead of you with a full agenda for important and timely discussions on this and a wide range of other issues. The recommendations emerging from your discussions will be critical to ensure that provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are advanced in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. We look forward to the continued advice and guidance of the Permanent Forum in making Indigenous issues an integral part of our work at the United Nations. We must keep our promise not to leave anyone, and that includes Indigenous peoples, behind. I wish you and all delegates successful deliberations during this 17th session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I thank you.
Je remercie la vice.
I thank the Vice President of the Economic and Social Council for her statement. It is now my pleasure to invite His Excellency, Mr. Evo Morales Ayma, President of the plurinational state of Bolivia, to address the Permanent Forum. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. A greeting to the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, to our sister, the Chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues of the United Nations, all authorities, international organizations, and a special greeting to our brothers and sisters, the delegates of Indigenous peoples throughout the world. Firstly, I should like to thank you for having invited me to participate in the inauguration of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues of the United Nations. Brothers and sisters, part of this movement means that I have to express my great joy that we as Indigenous peoples are now in the United Nations. We, the Indigenous peoples of the world, are now able to debate, not just to provide indications of how we think, but as our ancestors have done, we are able to defend life, humanity, and Mother Earth. I'd like to say to you that in America, after the European invasion of 1492, there was a hard struggle on the part of our forefathers. It took time, their knowledge. They gave this in the defense of our continent, previously called Abigado America. With now 500 years of Indigenous peoples' resistance behind us in 1991 and 92, with Sister Berta Renchu and other Indigenous peoples of the continent, we organized a major campaign of this resistance. This has become part of our history. In the past, during the colonial era, the greatest social force in America was that of the indigenous peoples, defending our dignity, our identity, struggling for equality. However, 200 years ago now, with some new social forces arising from indigenous peoples, there was a struggle for independence, for the creation of republics. We are members of a family struggling for its liberation. Now, in these days, we have more responsibilities, different ones, very important ones. I'd like to tell you of my experience. It has been very important to organize ourselves socially together, and not just organize ourselves to express our demands, but also to recover political power. With 500 years of indigenous people's resistance behind us in Nicaragua in 1992, we decided on resistance to recover political power so that we could govern ourselves. With all the principles left to us by our ancestors, I want to say to you that in Bolivia, thanks to the unity of the Bolivian people heading the Unity Pact of social movements, we have started to shake off external domination. But it is very important to identify issues among our friends, both within our ranks and outside. If we don't do this, it's impossible to think of a liberation for the peoples of the world. Brothers and sisters, I want to say to you today that this democratic and cultural liberation is a cultural revolution. It's very important to change the economic, social, and cultural situation of Bolivia. I could give you many figures, many statistics as to what we did in a very short time. On the basis of this brief experience, I want to state that unity is important. I repeat this again, not just thinking of indigenous peoples. We have had to bear many accusations, many humiliations. I remember, for example, in international events and various forums, they called us ethnic groups. We're not ethnic groups, we're nationalities. They referred to our languages as dialects. They're not, they're languages. And I would say this, why do I use the words brother and sister? Because we are all children of Mother Earth. We are all descendants of Mother Earth. Therefore, we are all brothers and sisters. Some of those in the West don't understand this. There is a mentality of superiority, looking down on us, not just down on indigenous peoples, but on other social sectors. I would say, brothers and sisters, that as we act, we feel that the future of indigenous peoples is endangered. Our future is in jeopardy, as is the life of mankind in this world. And why is this so? Why is there this danger? Because policies are aimed at gathering capital for just the few, disregarding Mother Earth, not acknowledging the rights of Mother Earth. And we, as indigenous peoples, have been vectors of brotherliness, of policies of complementarity, of solidarity. And in particular, we want to live in harmony with Mother Earth. our earth is not just a form of goods. It's being humiliated by the capitalist system. Unless we change these policies of capitalism, it will be hard for us to claim that life is guaranteed for all human beings living on this planet. So, brothers and sisters, I take advantage of this opportunity to see how it is that those gatherings which can help us as indigenous peoples with experts, professionals, organizations, how we can think of the life of those living on this planet Earth in Bolivia and in America, Latin America. We are asserting the culture of indigenous peoples, but also of all nationalities, of nature, defending and recovering natural resources for the people. So, brothers and sisters, it is vital for us to be organized. While the president of the forum spoke, I would refer to all delegates. We have to shoulder our responsibility. This is a critical juncture in the United Nations. We have to shoulder our responsibility to guarantee the rights of Mother Earth. If we fail to do this, we cannot be sure that there will be any guarantee for life. If we aren't respectful of Mother Earth, it's impossible to think of there being future generations. We hope that in these fora, in these workshops, in continents throughout the world, we as indigenous peoples will be able to express this. It's not a question of bringing forward new ideas, but rather of recovering the ideas bequeathed to us by our forefathers who've lived so long. We've seen the West, we've seen the pillage of our natural resources, and now we see natural resources being wasted. Actions have been very much to our detriment. But if we want to ensure the rights of Mother Earth, Pachamama in Bolivia, we have to be ready to combat imperialism, capitalism, interventionism, alarmism. These policies are aimed at bringing us to genocide. Brothers and sisters, I don't share with these ideas. How is it possible that certain countries pursue policies of intervention and humiliation while being well aware that these are not political issues, but they invent political issues so that they can step into a country with military force after having raped its natural resources? What about the indigenous people's resources, social groups? So there are friends, and if we are unable to organize ourselves, organize our countries, not just in the indigenous sector, but in other areas of society, we will not be able to guarantee the life of future generations. But, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome my invitation from Bolivia to participate in the forum. The document I received is indigenous issues. As a particular issue, it seems to be an alien issue, but we're human beings. I would ask the president in this event to change the wording here when it comes to discussing indigenous issues. As peoples, we have rights. This shouldn't be indigenous issues, but the rights of the indigenous peoples of the world. Because we're talking of the rights of the indigenous peoples of the world. So we could revise some of the terms used in the international lexicon. I, ladies and gentlemen, had a brief experience then with this organizational event. It's important to share the organization of the 5 continents in order to save Mother Earth. Brothers and sisters, I wish every success to this new forum so that we can debate, but again I wish to call upon my experience. If we want to save mankind, because we're not struggling, we're not fighting just for indigenous peoples, we're fighting for everybody, all human beings living on this earth. This is what our forefathers did. This is what we've done in Bolivia. This is the confidence that the peoples, indigenous peoples have. We're not on the margins of society, we're part of society. This living in harmony with Mother Earth is very important. So, brothers and sisters, with your aid, with your participation, we can set firmly in the UN the rights of Mother Earth. Over 70 years ago, we had human rights, with the Declaration of Human Rights established, political, economic, social rights being enshrined. I think it was in 2007 at last, I hope I'm not mistaken, the rights of indigenous peoples was approved at the UN because of the request of indigenous people. Bolivia was the first country to ratify this with a national law and enshrine what was approved in the United Nations in our constitution, the rights of indigenous peoples. This is enshrined in our law and in our constitution in Bolivia. There have been other rights, but I want to say that for me, the most important right of all is that of Mother Earth, because it is Mother Earth which ensures that we can survive. If we do not guarantee the existence of Mother Earth, there can be no certainty for life. How can we do this? How can we ensure the life of Mother Earth? There are many differences among certain countries, but I feel that we have friends throughout the world. Alas, in Latin America and elsewhere, there has been extermination with indigenous peoples being exterminated, trying to eradicate our identity, our way of life. But we are still here to put forward our demands. So, brothers and sisters, I trust that this will be a great success. I vest much trust in indigenous peoples and social movements. For many years, they defended, helped me, and together we struggled for the freedom of the Bolivian people. Bolivia shares the results that we've achieved. We were 108 years as a colonized state, and now we are plurinational. When we shake off the yoke of foreign domination, particularly U.S. domination, and that of the IMF, we are better economically, better democratically, better off culturally. This is the outcome. This is why, then, it is important to free ourselves from what is imposed from on high and outside. So, brothers and sisters, I wish us every success and call upon you to share your experiences of way of life and of management. And I would say, the indigenous peoples of the world, thank you very much and good luck.
Je remercie le président de l'État.
I thank the President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia for his statement. I would once again like to thank our distinguished guests for their inspiring statements and for being with us this morning. distinguished members of the Forum, we shall now proceed to the election of the other officers for this session. I first give the floor to Mr. Gervais Nzoa.
Madame la Présidente, je voudrais tout d'abord.
Madam Chair, I would first of all like to thank you for giving me the floor, and I would then like to take this opportunity to congratulate you upon your re-election to chair the 17th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Turning to proposals for the post of Vice Chair, I would like to take this opportunity to propose my colleagues, the following experts, to the post of Vice Chair: Ms. Anne Nwogam, Ms. Tarsila Rivera, Ms. Xiang Zhang, and Mr. Dimitri Haraka. Thank you.
Je remercie Monsieur Nzoa d'avoir.
I thank Mr. Nzoa for the nomination of Ms. Anne Nwogam, Mr. Dimitri Haraka Tsajev, Ms. Tarsila Rivera Zea, and Ms. Xiaoyang Zhang as Vice Chairs, and Mr. Brian Keane as Rapporteur of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I now give the floor to Mr. Jesus Guadalupe Fuentes Blanco.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam. And I would join in the chorus of congratulations and your appointment to this forum. We know that we're in safe hands with you on the right road. Thank you very much. I would also like to refer to the appointments mentioned by my brother Gervais and ratify the proposals for a Vice President of our Permanent Forum, from Mr. Dimitri Haraka, Mr. Anogam, Mr. Tarsila Rivera, Madam Shang, and our brother Dimitri Haraka. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Jesus Blanco.
I thank Mr. Blanco for his statement. I would now like to return the floor to Mr. Gervais Nzoa to nominate the rapporteur.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for once again giving me the floor. I would like to take this opportunity to propose the candidacy of Mr. Brian Keane as rapporteur of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Nzoa.
Thank you, Mr. Nzoa. I now give the floor to Mr. Jesus Blanco Fuentes to nominate the rapporteur.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We would ratify the nomination of Mr. Brian Keane to be rapporteur of this 17th session. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Fuentes.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes Blanco. May I take it that members of the Forum wish to elect Ms. Anne Nwogam, Mr. Dimitri Haraka-Zaitsev, Ms. Tarsila Rivera Zea, and Ms. Xiaoyan Zhang as Vice Chairs of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and Mr. Brian Keane as Rapporteur of the 17th session by acclamation?
Il en est ainsi décidé.
It is so decided.
Je félicite Madame Nwogam.
I would like to congratulate Ms. Nwogam, Mr. Haraka-Zaitsev, Ms. Rivera Zea, and Ms. Zhang on their election as Vice Chairs, and also congratulate Mr. Keane on his election as Rapporteur. I now propose to members of the Forum to proceed with the adoption of the provisional agenda for the 17th session, as contained in document E/C.19/2018/1. The provisional agenda for the 17th session was proposed by the Permanent Forum in the report of its 16th session in 2017 and was approved by the Economic and Social Council in July 2017 in its decision number 2017/249. Are there any comments on the agenda as contained in document E/C.19/2018/1?
Puis-je considérer que tous
May I take it that the provisional agenda is acceptable to all members of the Forum? The agenda for the 17th session is adopted.
J'aimerais maintenant appeler l'attention.
I now wish to draw the attention of the Forum to the proposed organisation of work of the session as contained in document E/C.19/2018/L1. This document was prepared by the Secretariat in consultation with the members of the Forum. It is a reference guide for the session containing a detailed description of our programme of work on a day-to-day basis. May I take it that it is the wish of the Permanent Forum to proceed in accordance with the programme of work contained in document L1? I see no objections. It is so decided. I would now like to make a statement in my capacity as Chair of the 17th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Mr. Miroslav Lajčák, President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, Ms. Inga Ronda King, Vice President of the Economic and Social Council, Mr. Evo Morales Ayma, President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, Mr. Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, distinguished members of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, distinguished elders and delegates, Indigenous sisters and brothers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you here today at this 17th session of the Permanent Forum. Let me pay my respect to the Onondaga nations and peoples, in particular Tadodahu Sid Hill, the traditional chief of the Onondaga Nation, the original inhabitants of this land, and to thank them for having us here again. I would like to thank my colleagues of the Permanent Forum for placing their trust in me to chair this session. I am humbled by this and promise to do my best to carry out my duties. I count on your valuable support so the Forum can contribute significantly to improving the well-being and lives of Indigenous peoples around the world. On behalf of my colleagues, I extend our sincere thanks to the government of the plurinational state of Bolivia for graciously hosting our pre-sessional meeting. This gave us the space to prepare for this session and to meet with Indigenous peoples' organizations, as well as the United Nations country team and government representatives. Bolivia is unique, as the President said, in having adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into its national law, an example that other countries may wish to follow. Thank you for having us in your beautiful country and for having introduced us to several aspects of this country. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and friends, the special theme of the Forum session this year is Indigenous peoples' collective rights to lands, territories, and resources. This recognizes the fundamental importance of these rights to Indigenous peoples. Our lands and resources are the sources of our spiritual, cultural, and collective identities, and constitute the basis of our economic livelihoods. Collective rights to lands, territories, and resources are key demands of the international Indigenous peoples movement and of Indigenous peoples and organizations everywhere. These rights are firmly guaranteed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including within the framework of our right to self-determination. Indigenous peoples' tradition of collective rights to lands, territories, and resources is part of our history and heritage. This vision is often in contrast with dominant models of individual ownership, privatization, and development. There is growing recognition that advancing in Indigenous peoples' rights to lands and resources not only contributes to their well-being, but also to the greater good of the world by tackling problems such as climate change and loss of biodiversity. Studies show that securing rights of Indigenous peoples to forests often leads to low deforestation, which mitigates climate change at low costs. And also that Indigenous peoples' managed lands host 80% of the remaining biodiversity of the Earth. Unfortunately, only a few countries have recognized or made efforts to uphold Indigenous peoples' collective rights to lands, territories, and resources, in line with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Most countries are yet to recognize such rights, let alone implement them. Even in those countries where those rights are recognized, enforcement of laws is weak or often lacking altogether, with contradictory laws affecting those rights. Necessary procedures, such as demarcation and titling for lands, are not effectively undertaken, and security of land and resource rights continues to be a problem. We continue to hear of Indigenous peoples' rights defenders and movements being targeted for raising their voices and protecting their rights against the expropriation of their lands and the extraction of their resources without their free, prior, and informed consent. That often happens when states or non-state actors want their lands and resources for aggressive development projects or for destructive business operations in violation of national and international standards. Our land and resources are our life, not mere commodities. Without our rights to our lands, territories, and resources being recognized and protected, we are in danger of remaining behind in the global goals of sustainable development. At the same time, the world is also at risk of losing out to challenges of climate change and environmental destruction. So we should be reminded of this reality at this year's session. Allow me now to give you some highlights concerning the next 2 weeks. This year, in response to the inputs and feedback received, we have decided to initiate a change in our methods of work. The aim is to strike a strategic balance in providing space for Indigenous peoples, member states, UN entities, and others to share good practices and discuss challenges for implementing the UN Declaration, and also for formulating expert advice and policy recommendations from the Forum in this regard. The first week of the Forum will be all open plenary meetings with discussions on all agenda items. There will be no formal closed meeting organized during this first week. During the second week, members of the Forum will hold informal meetings with representatives of Indigenous peoples, member states, and UN entities. The purpose of these meetings will be to draw upon information presented during the first week and to channel this into practical policy recommendations that are strategic, focused, and actionable. Simultaneous regional dialogues will also be held during the second week so that Permanent Forum members can conduct focused discussions on issues relevant to those regions. This year, we will continue with the interactive dialogues with member states, indigenous peoples, and the United Nations system. It is our hope that these dialogues will provide an opportunity to identify challenges and opportunities that you may face, as well as the progress made in carrying out your commitment to strengthen indigenous peoples' rights. We look forward to this constructive dialogue so that we can mutually support our work to promote respect for and full application of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Other highlights of this session include a discussion on the International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019, as well as Indigenous women, children, and youth. There will be a discussion on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as an expert body of the Economic and Social Council, has a key role to play in ensuring that the rights and priorities of indigenous peoples are considered in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. As the Vice President of the Economic and Social Council noted, we count on your support to better incorporate indigenous issues into the 2030 Development Agenda. We will also have a discussion to follow up on the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples for an update on recent developments at the national and international level. This includes an update on national action plans. In this context, the President of the General Assembly, tomorrow, Tuesday 17th of April, in the afternoon, will conduct consultations on the participation of indigenous peoples, representatives and institutions in relevant United Nations meetings on issues affecting them. And the President of the General Assembly invites you to participate in this so that you can give your views and opinions directly. I'm also pleased to announce that for the second year, there will be an Indigenous Media Zone organized in coordination with the Department of Public Information and Indigenous media groups. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my co-members of the Permanent Forum for their continuing commitment and contribution to achieve the Forum's mandate, and for the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which provides us with the framework to guide and inspire our work. I thank the representatives of indigenous peoples' organizations and nations, member states, the Interagency Support Group on Indigenous Issues, and our partners and colleagues who have made significant efforts to realize the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I also extend our appreciation to the team at the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum in the Division for Social Policy and Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, who work tirelessly to prepare for the session and who continue to support us throughout these 2 weeks and in the production of reports. Finally, I would like to pay tribute to the indigenous peoples of the entire world who tirelessly pursue their struggle for their rights and dignities, and so that their own visions and priorities for development are taken into account. It is thanks to them that we are indeed here today. Many of you have travelled far from home to participate in this session. Let us all work together to make this session meaningful for you and your peoples. Thank you.
Mesdames et Messieurs,
distinguished members of the Forum, distinguished observers, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honour to invite Mr. Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist, to make a statement on behalf of the Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu Zhenmin. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to New York to all of you. On this occasion of the opening of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, we are reminded of the important contributions that Indigenous peoples make to our world. Whether through mitigating and adapting to climate change or safeguarding our world heritage, Indigenous peoples are at the vanguard of addressing environmental challenges based on the principles of sustainability, respect for our planet, Mother Earth, and a balanced approach to people-centered sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals both make explicit references to Indigenous peoples. They also highlight critical issues that Indigenous peoples have advocated for centuries, such as clean water, sustainability, and the reduction of inequalities. The international community has become increasingly open to Indigenous peoples. This is the right thing to do, and it is the smart thing to do. It is right because Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making at all levels, so that they can determine their own development priorities. It is smart because Indigenous peoples have an enormous wealth of traditional knowledge of sustainable livelihoods and often espouse holistic views that benefit all of us. We do need to listen to Indigenous peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, in September of 2007, the UN General Assembly adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the minimum standard for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world. In 2014, the General Assembly hosted the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, a testament to the growing commitment by member states to recognizing the rights and role of indigenous peoples in promoting peace and prosperity. Just 1 year later, in 2015, we launched the system-wide action plan on the rights of indigenous peoples. The action plan identifies concrete measures to support the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Country-level implementation is critical if we are to make the United Nations Declaration a reality for indigenous peoples, who unfortunately are still among those most likely to be left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the government of the plurinational state of Bolivia for graciously hosting the pre-sessional meeting of the Permanent Forum earlier this year in the beautiful city of Sucre. I invite other countries to consider hosting the Forum's future pre-sessional meetings as well. The work of the Permanent Forum is important, particularly in the context of the 2030 Agenda. It provides a platform to highlight the situation, the perspectives, and the priorities of the world's indigenous peoples. It is a unique space for dialogue and for cooperation, for member states and indigenous peoples to work together in close partnership, so that indeed no one is left behind. On behalf of Mr. Liu, the Under-Secretary General of the Department for Economic and Social Affairs, I wish you successful deliberations, and I thank you.
je remercie.
I thank the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development for his statement. Distinguished members of the Forum, distinguished observers, ladies and gentlemen, we have thus concluded the opening meeting of our session. This afternoon at 3 p.m. we shall begin our consideration of Agenda Item 3, follow-up to the recommendations of the Permanent Forum, and Item 4, implementation of the 6 mandated areas of the Permanent Forum with reference to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The meeting will take place in Conference Room 4. I shall now give the floor to the Secretariat for some announcements.
I thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to remind delegations that inscription to the list of speakers under all agenda items is open on eDelegate on the eSpeakers platform. In addition, the inscription for the list of speakers for Indigenous peoples will be reopened in the visitors' lobby at 2 p.m. today. All participants are reminded that they can only speak once under each agenda item. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Je vous remercie et je...
I should like to thank you. The meeting is adjourned.